Okay, so let's dive into something you probably think is simple: your right to keep people off your property. It seems basic, right? Get off my lawn. But underneath that simple idea is this huge, fascinating legal battleground with all sorts of surprising limits. Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on what that really means. In the legal world, the power to say keep out is a really big deal. They talk about a bundle of rights that come with owning property. And the right to exclude, that's seen as one of the most treasured, most important sticks in the whole bundle. It's like the main pillar of property ownership. But as we're about to see, even pillars can get cracks. All right, so before we get into the big fights and the dramatic court cases, we got to understand the foundation this is all built on, and that's the law of trespass. Now, check out this definition. The key word here, and this trips a lot of people up, is intentional. This doesn't mean you intended to do something wrong. Nope. It just means you intended to take the step that put you on someone else's property. So, if you're wandering around and you accidentally step onto your neighbor's yard thinking it's still a park, well, that's still a trespass because you intended to walk there. And that one simple rule, it basically builds this huge legal fortress around your property. It sets the default for everything. You, the owner, are the one in charge. You're the gatekeeper. And for centuries, I mean literally centuries, the law treated this fortress like it was absolutely impenetrable. The owner's power was seen as almost total. I mean, just listen to this ancient legal idea. It's a mouthful of Latin, but it basically says your property rights stretch from the center of the earth all the way up to the heavens. It's not just a patch of dirt, it's this entire column of space that you control. So, in theory, even a tree branch hanging over your fence was a trespass. It's a wild concept, but it shows you how absolute this power was thought to be. And get this power wasn't just for your private home. It extended to businesses too. The traditional rule, which is still the case in most of the US, is that if you open a shop or a restaurant, you still have the power to kick anyone out for pretty much any reason at all, or for no reason whatsoever. Okay, so we've built up this idea of the all-powerful property owner inside their impenetrable fortress. But what happens when that absolute power slams right into basic, fundamental human needs? This is where it gets really interesting. This is where those fortress walls start to show some cracks, because the law has to step in and ask a really tough question. Do property rights get to trump everything else, even human life and well-being?
So the law has these built-in escape hatches. An entry isn't a trespass if it's privileged. Now, that's just a fancy legal word, but it includes some common sense things. Like, if the owner says you can come in, that's consent. Or, more dramatically, if you have to run onto someone's property to prevent a much more serious harm, that's necessity. And sometimes public policy just says access is more important.
And this brings us to a huge landmark case called State v. Shack. So picture this. You have a farmer, and he's got migrant workers living right there on his property. It's part of their job. Then a doctor and a lawyer who work for organizations that help these workers try to come on the property to offer medical and legal aid. And the farmer says, nope, get out, you're trespassing. And the court's decision was, wow, it was a game changer. The New Jersey Supreme Court said, flat out, that the farmer couldn't do that. They ruled it wasn't a trespass. And this quote says it all. Property rights serve human values. Basically, owning land doesn't give you the right to control the lives of the people who are there. Their well-being was more important. Here's another really powerful case. In Massachusetts, you have a homeless man who's just trying to survive the winter. On dangerously cold nights, he takes shelter in private buildings to keep from freezing. And he keeps getting charged with trespassing. The conflict here couldn't be more clear. It's the owner's right to have an empty hallway versus this man's need to literally stay alive. And the court looked at this and sided with human life. It said the man could use the necessity defense. The logic is really simple. The harm of dying from exposure is obviously way, way worse than the harm of someone temporarily being in a hallway. It's a clear statement that sometimes saving a life is more important than the absolute right to exclude. So we've seen that emergencies and public policy can poke some serious holes in that property rights fortress. But what about the place where most of us run into this issue every day? Businesses. And this gets to the heart of the whole puzzle. When a store or a restaurant invites the public in to do business, is it still their private castle where they can kick out anyone they want for any reason? Or does it become something different, something more like a public square with some public responsibilities? Well, believe it or not, the law has two totally different answers. Most states follow what's called the majority rule, which gives almost all the power to the property owner. In those states, a shopkeeper could, in theory, ask you to leave just because they don't like the color of your shirt. But a minority of states, like New Jersey, have a different rule. They say that once you open your doors to the public, you owe them a right of reasonable access. You can't just kick people out for no reason. It can't be arbitrary. A classic example of this is the case of Ken Houston. He was a famous professional card counter, and a casino in Atlantic City tried to ban him, but the court said no way. Houston wasn't causing a disturbance, and card counting wasn't actually illegal. So the casino didn't have a reasonable reason to kick him out. It was arbitrary, and under that minority rule, that's not allowed. Now, this whole debate, who gets to decide who's in and who's out, was bound to crash headfirst into one of the biggest issues in American history: civil rights. Society had to draw some really clear lines in the sand. You have these two landmark moments. Right after the Civil War, and then again 100 years later, the federal government stepped in. They passed these huge laws that fundamentally changed the game, making it illegal to use the right to exclude as a weapon of discrimination. That 1964 Civil Rights Act was just a massive shift. It declared that if you run one of these businesses, a hotel, a restaurant, a theater, you have given up part of your absolute right to exclude. You can no longer turn people away because of their race, their religion, or where they're from. That fortress of private property now has a very public, very open gate. And this is really the modern truce, the balance we've struck. The right to exclude is still powerful, still treasured, but it's not absolute. It has to bend for things like necessity, for public policy, and most importantly, it has to bend for civil rights and basic human dignity. And that leaves us with a question for today, doesn't it? These old legal battles are still being fought, just on new frontiers. A bakery that won't make a cake, a social media platform that bans a user. The battleground has changed, but the fundamental question is exactly the same. Who gets to decide who's in and who's out? And that is as relevant and as complicated as ever.